call the meeting to order. Everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Happy spring, everybody.
Happy, joy.
All right, we're going to start. I'd like to open the public hearing. So we're going to be hearing, I'm going to turn the floor over to Peter Sanborn. He is from the Community Opportunity Group to discuss the Community Development Block Grant. It's all yours, Peter.
Okay, thank you. I'm not known for being brief, but I always try to be, so.
Yeah.
But, Anthony knows that. Pleased to be here. My name's Peter Sanborn. Some familiar faces, some faces that aren't familiar. This is a grant program that the town has participated in since 1991, most recently. Actually, that we have been working, I'm a consultant, we've been working in the town since 1991. I think periodically, actually, the town received some grants before 1991, not on a regular basis. But in the periods, in the 27 years since 1991, hard to believe it's that long, the town's received well over 20 grants from this program. This is a federal program. It's money from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. It's called the Community Development Block Grant, but the money flows through the state Department of Housing. They run a competition every year, and the town has applied virtually every year. Unfortunately, in the past couple of years, the town has submitted applications and were not successful, much to our frustration, and frankly, we think unjustifiably. But the town is committed because this program has had a lot of benefits for town residents, both individual homeowners as well as for residents generally. One of the things that the town has done continuously since receiving these funds is run the housing rehabilitation program, which some of you may have heard of, some of you may not have ever heard of it. It provides financial assistance for income qualifying homeowners to make repairs to their properties. And the income limits are on the back side here. It's sort of a sliding scale. So if anybody could qualify to receive assistance from the program based on their household size, if they make up to the column on the far right, the column that says under 80%. So these are not, they're not high income limits, but they're certainly not poverty level income limits either. In the course of the time that the program has been operating, it's actually helped several hundred homeowners make repairs to their properties over the years. And one of the nice things are that this is a 0% loan. Does not have to be paid back until a property is sold. So if you got $10,000 today and you sold the house in 15 years, you're paying back $10,000 in 15 years. So even think of the power of inflation, what $10,000 today is going to be worth in 15 years. So it's, I think for homeowners, it's an incredibly, it's the best deal out there, I think. The good thing about it, when that money, when a property is sold and money comes back to the town, it's called program income, which is your other handout is a program income plan. The town has to present to the state how it wants to, how it intends to spend any income that it receives as a result of these grant activities. The town has, in the past, received a lot of program income over the years, cumulatively. It's received over $700,000 of paybacks. And those monies have been used in one of two ways. They've been recycled back in to assist other homeowners make repairs to their properties. It's just recycling the money. Or it's been actually used to pay for engineering fees when the town has done street and road and infrastructure projects, and it's even funded some of the construction. So it's always been recycled back into the town. Over the history of the grant, for those of you who've attended public hearings before, you've heard this, but this grant program, in addition to funding the housing rehabilitation program, it's funded a lot of street projects in Stafford Springs, up on the hill, on Center Street, on Converse Street. I mean, those projects are now more than a decade old, but it paid for the reconstruction of those streets. It paid for the conversion of the barracks into the senior center when the town took possession. It was this grant program that paid for the development of the senior center. Back in the early 1990s, it paid for the renovation and the expansion of the family services building. It had been used to purchase a van for the seniors. So it's been used for a lot of good purposes, things that the town needed but may not have been able to afford on its own. This grant, the amount the town can apply for is based on the type of project that it's going after. The state has set different caps for different types of things. Unfortunately, in recent years, fortunately and unfortunately, in recent years, state priorities have really been to use these grant funds relating to housing, whether it's housing rehabilitation programs or in a lot of other towns, cities and towns, it's used the funds to upgrade public housing, to do public housing modernization works for elderly housing developments or family public housing developments that were built in the 50s or 60s or 70s. It's been used to upgrade those. For several years, Stafford was using it back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It was sort of alternating between doing housing rehabilitation one year, then the next year funding a street project. So it would alternate back and forth. The state, about 8 years ago, the state has really just said, unfortunately, I think for a town like Stafford, it has said, we don't want to do street projects. We don't think they're needed. And we've gone to them and said, we've seen evidence that, the investment in improving the streets in the borough has triggered reinvestment into the housing stock, private reinvestment in the housing stock. They don't buy it. We actually show them examples and they don't buy it. But so the long and the short of that is that for the current priorities of the state, the town's real option to use these funds is related to housing, for the housing rehabilitation program, potentially for other types of housing activities. So, as I've said, the town's received more than 20 grants, millions and millions of dollars since the early 1990s. And the town intends to apply for $400,000 in grant funding to reestablish Housing Rehabilitation Program, which has been dormant for almost 2 years now. It's been dormant since July of 2016. The town has applied for 2 grants since then. They were not funded. As I said earlier, we think for totally unjustifiable reasons. Former first selectman is acutely aware of that. We've had many conversations about that. The new first selectman is also aware of this history. So with that, I would just like to hear any comments, public, or questions the public might like to present to the board.
Can you ask a question?
Yep.
I missed the first couple minutes, so I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to ask a question that's foolish, but
And you probably didn't get this.
I just picked one up and I did read through it, yeah.
That, no, I think.
Oh, this
what
is
you
another
said-
one, okay.
What you got was different.
My question is this, I'm on one of the boards that's concerned with water pollution control in the town.
Mhm.
And we think we have a serious problem where part of the system is actually collapsing. And it's the part that carries some of the largest loads, including all of the material from the high school, the middle school, the library. And a repair is gonna be very costly. Is that something that could be considered for a grant like this or not?
In theory, yes. In practicality, probably not.
Okay.
And I can explain it publicly, or I can have a one-on-one with you, whichever. One of the things, so it's sort of a decision tree when you look at potential grant projects. First question is, can you use these funds for that purpose? Can you use the funds to rebuild sewer system or something like that? The answer is yes, you can. Then the next question you have to ask is, what national objective does it meet? This is grant bureaucraties, but in the law that established this program, every use of your funds has to address one of 3 national objectives that are written right into the law.
Is environmental protection one of them?
No,
No. Because the problem would be, of course, any waste that was released here will flow right into the right into the sound.
right,
And technically, that's the state mandate. Why we have to have water pollution systems is to protect the sound.
right.
Okay, but that wouldn't.
That's,
Okay.
I will say that's EPA's concern, that's
Okay.
that's
And-
not our
And even
concern.
though this is classified by our engineers, I mean, it's only preliminary study, but their conclusion so far is that this is an emergency situation, that, you know, we couldn't anticipate. It's not just a normal upgrading or anything like that. That doesn't make any difference either.
Well, one of the national objectives, so there are 3 national objectives, I won't get too far in the weeds. May I
Of
go
course.
ahead? Is benefit to low and moderate income persons, which is why the housing rehab program, when we did streets, we actually did surveys to determine that a majority of the residents on those streets fell within the income limits. So you have to go through a pretty, if you're doing like an infrastructure project, a sewer project, you have to go through a pretty rigorous process to demonstrate that. So the second national objective is to prevent or eliminate slums and blight. Horrible terms, but that's language which we have to use. That would be, I think, difficult to make the connection. The third one is that you address a critical community need. Now, possibly it could fall under that, but their definition, HUD's definition of what a critical community need is very, very narrow. It's basically defined as an unforeseen occurrence within the past 18 months, for which there's no other funding available. There's not federal, there's not state, there's not local funding. I've worked in this program for almost 40 years. In New England, I've heard of it being used twice. It's that tough to do, to meet that test. Possibly you can, possibly it's, possibly it's worth investigating more. The other part of it is, though, DOH's point of view is, I mean, the most you could apply for the sewer is $700,000. You probably have more than a $700,000
Maybe
project.
100, or 200,000 more, 100,000 more
Right.
probably, because they're gonna put in a new line, they can't use the ones we already have. But I didn't understand that, thank you for telling me, I just didn't understand the guidelines.
So the other thing they would need to make this viable is you gotta have, if you need more funds than what they're gonna fund, you've gotta have those funds securely in hand.
Okay.
They're not gonna say, we're gonna make a commitment and you go out and find the funds. So,
Okay.
I mean, maybe it's worth exploring more.
It might be.
Karen Triano, 20 Patton Road. I'm thrilled that we are applying for a component for housing rehab. I'm doubly thrilled that Community Opportunities is handling it, and the housing rehab portion of it, makes people hopeful, and people are grateful. So I think it's a great thing for the Board of Selectmen to do. Thank you.
Hi, Peter. Anne Marie Prone from the
Hi,
Stafford
Ann.
Housing Authority. How are you? Thank you for having me tonight. I just want to bring a different perspective. I have a community of seniors, low-income seniors, who are living in this community as residents of this community, voting residents, I might add. And they have not seen hide nor hair of that money, probably in the, what'd you say, 21 years that you've been doing it, Peter? And yet, as you pointed out, the last 2 to 3 years, most of that money has been going to housing authorities. I'm a little confused as to why the money's, I think it's only been used once that I'm aware of, and that's probably back in the 1990s, that it was used for the bus. No other time am I aware of that I could find where it was ever used for the housing authority. Again, I find it confusing that such a large portion of people that are residents of this community have not felt the benefit of that monies when the property itself, well before me, has been floundering. The roofs haven't been replaced, no ADA compliance has been looked at. None of the work that could be done with this money has been done or even considered for that property. So I just think that the first selectman and the town of Stafford needs to consider that this is a really important investment, because this is where a lot of your seniors live. A number of disabled people live there as well, and they deserve good, safe, affordable housing, and we can't keep providing it, not on the rents that we're charging, and do roofs, or, you know, be able to have, I had to turn a gentleman away because I couldn't provide him housing because he couldn't get his wheelchair in the apartment. He couldn't get into his bathroom. I mean, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be providing housing, not turning people away.
I'm glad you spoke up, and if I can give a little bit of perspective on a couple of things, going back in a little bit of history. There've been a lot of changes by the state over the years. In the 90s and in the early 2000s, actually, every town could apply for X number of dollars,
Right.
regardless as to what type of project you could do. So you could apply for 500, or you could apply for 600. Now it's like now they have this very complicated tiering scale, as you know, that varies from $400 up to $800,000, depending on the type of project that you're doing. The other, so now they've gotten this more nuanced tiered level, rather than saying, every town you can come in for X number of dollars, regardless what you wanna do with it. The other thing, that big change that really hurt Stafford a lot is, in those earlier years of the grant program, you could apply for multiple activities within a
Right.
grant.
Right,
So you could apply for a van, you could apply for something else. And then they cut it down to the fact, you can only apply for one activity. You can only apply for one project. So it made the choice more difficult for the leaders of the town to decide what they would choose. So, for example, you can still apply for a van. So, or you can apply for housing. So you can apply for housing and get potentially $400,000, or you can apply for a van and get $60,000. Not a great choice, van may be needed, but the realities are, most towns are gonna go for 400,000. With respect to the housing authority, I know there've been a lot of changes, housing authority in recent years. We were told years ago, the housing authority wanted to do something when a lot of different other people were there. We approached them, we contacted them, there was never any follow-up. We actually reached out to them. So,
well, I don't know if you were involved in that, I mean, they did get the money for the sewer project, which brought the new housing development up there.
I'm talking about
Or
years
before that, oh, okay, so that was before me, but I think my concern is, we all know grants and funding of any kind are getting more and more competitive. The
Right.
money's just not it doesn't flow as well as it used to. And I think when you look at the scoring, the rating and ranking for this program specifically, the housing authority gets extra points just being the housing authority, just being part of the state housing portfolio, just being affordable housing. All of our residents are well below, probably well below your poverty level that you were talking about. So just the fact that we can take an application that for the last 2 years has not gotten funded and add those points and get a better application in, I just, again, wonder why the selectmen have chosen not to apply for $800,000 for a property that needs the money when that application is much more competitive. And I'm not saying, again, I agree with you, I wish that you could split the funding, because yes, the residents that use that money for rehabs on their homes, it's just as much needed, I absolutely agree. But again, if that application is going to be turned down for a third year in a row, when you know the state has been pushing for their portfolio, the state housing portfolio, to be updated and modernized, I don't understand why we wouldn't apply for it.
well, you and I have had this conversation.
Yes, we have.
And it could be a very competitive application, but I think the conversation we had also talked about the readiness to proceed. And for you to be very competitive, you needed to have a concrete plan, you needed to have architectural plans, engineering plans, complete, and a cost estimate, and if you did not have those, in my view, it would be more than offsetting the competitive advantage of them funding a state housing portfolio project. Because if you look in the feasibility part of the application, so much is about, are your plans 100% ready? Are they 50% ready? Are they 25% ready? And all the points through all of that, I think you would have lost more points because you were not ready this year, which does not mean that it could be completely different, and I hope it would be next year.
I think that's a really valid point. I just think that when you're hearing from the beginning, when we first started speaking about it, that we weren't even an option. Way back when we first started talking about it, I have a budget that's just as tight as the town's budget, probably more so, and I can't afford to throw money after something that I know I'm not gonna get when I'm told that we weren't even gonna be considered. So again, I think the fact that we're not just talking about this year's funding, we're talking about the fact that in 20-plus years, the Housing Authority's been considered twice, and one was for a bus which has been used to death. Thank God we had it, because for the last 20 years, it saved our residents. And the other was for the sewer for the new community. I think, again, it should have been used much more often than it was for a housing authority which houses the seniors of our community, quite a few seniors in our community. Okay.
I'm not gonna disagree with you, but, you know, the housing authority is a separate entity from town government. And if in the past you reached out to the housing authority and there was basically a dial tone when you reached out to them, it's maybe a little harsh, but that's effectively what it was. In the past, I've been told to reach out to them,
Right.
and it's still, they weren't even coming halfway at that point.
Yeah. I wish I could speak to that, because I wasn't around for that, but I definitely hear what you're saying, because unfortunately I've run up against it, and it was well before me, so. Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Hi, I have a quick comment. My name is Stacy Joseph from Colette Road. My background is social work, and so I'm for any program that helps people who couldn't do something otherwise get to a place where they need to be. I will say that I have a friend. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. I had a friend that participated in the program a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I don't know when we had it last. And as most social programs go, you probably know that they look better than they really are. She did have a lot of difficulty with the contractors complying with the agreement, and she felt like she didn't have a lot of form of recourse when there were problems. So maybe not necessarily, I think definitely try to get the grant, definitely, but see about the carrying it out, make sure that the contractors are overseen and that their customers have a way of recourse when projects don't go as planned.
That it? Anybody else for Peter?
I guess just in closing, I'd say, though the program is currently dormant right now, we encourage people, whether it's you or people you know, to submit applications. The state wants to, part of the state's review of the application is, what is the need, what is the demand for the program. So it's hard to say, submit an application when we don't have any funding for you. So it's a chicken and the egg sort of thing, but there's an application on the town's website. And we would encourage anybody, if you are interested or you have a neighbor or relative who could use this assistance. It's not a perfect program. Our contractors aren't perfect. Our clientele sometimes aren't perfect. It's a program with human interaction, but I think on balance, it's a really excellent program for residents who need. And in fact, for many people, particularly for elderly or people who've had changes in their health or medical condition. Many times we've done modifications to their house that have enabled them to remain in their home when otherwise they would have had to move into some sort of facility, so.
Is there help for the seniors or anybody that's mentally challenged to put the paperwork through instead of just going on the website?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't file the application on the website, you can download the application. So, yeah, they can, our phone number is on there, and if they need help to complete the application, we're more than happy to help them fill it out.
It's good to know, thank you.
I would just say that I agree with Anne Marie going forward, because I spoke with you earlier today about what the focus was gonna be for this grant application. Seeing as how the last 2 years went in the state, roughly 90 or 95% of those that are awarded have all been housing authority type of housing grants. So I would agree with Anne Marie. I would also suggest, though, you have a year, because there was no viability conversation taking place out at Avery Park prior to this year. So the window was such that there wasn't enough time for you guys successfully, I would say, this year in his expertise. You've been successful and were in this last couple of years. If you weren't successful here, you were successful in Ellington and Putnam and other towns, because he works for other towns. So he's the right person, we just need to get the right focus, and if you guys can get those details, I would suggest that's a great idea for the town.
Discussion.
So I agree 100%.
I mean, we've done similar types of projects with either nonprofit housing or housing authorities. And the lead time is really a minimum of a year to put those together to be a competitive application, so.
I'll call you next week.
There you go.
Call me on April 13th,
That's when the application goes in.
on the 12th.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question before I close the public hearing? No? Public hearing is closed. All right, we're going into the CDBG, the grant application with a discussion and motions. Do you want to go through everything, or do you want us to just go to the motions, or how do you want to do this, Peter?
Just do the motions. Sure.
Can we read all of them at
Yep.
once?
That's what you've done in the past.
Okay, do you want to read them?
Sure.
Tony, so that's since just you and I.
Recommended vote by Board of Selectmen relating to fiscal year 2018 Connecticut Small Cities CDBG Program Grant Application. Motion to, 1, approve the filing of a fiscal year 2018 Connecticut Small Cities CDBG Program Grant Application in an amount not to exceed $400,000, and to authorize, and direct the first selectman to execute and file such application and all documents, plans, certifications, resolutions related hereto. 2, to designate Mary Mita as the environmental clear certifying officer. 3, to adopt the resolution required by the Connecticut Department of Housing relating to said application. 4, to approve the program income reuse plan. 5, to designate Mary Mita as the fair housing officer. 6, to designate Mary Mita as the ADA coordinator. And 7, to designate Mary Mita as the affirmative action compliance officer.
Is that your motion?
Yeah,
That
that
your
was my
motion?
motion.
That was, okay. I second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I found a typo. Tony didn't.
Yeah,
Tony usually catches
I only
those.
work on it.
Marty? Yeah. All right.
You probably need to adopt that, officially read that
Resolution.
resolution and adopt it.
Okay. Thank you.
You don't have to read the top part, clerk would certify. So everything under the, under the
Yep.
line there.
You want me to read that?
Yeah, sure. So it's from the clerk?
Yeah. Whereas federal monies are available under the Connecticut Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program administered by the State of Connecticut Department of Housing pursuant to Public Law 93-383 as amended, and whereas pursuant to Chapter 127C and Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Commissioner of Housing is authorized to disperse such federal monies to local municipalities, and whereas it is desirable and in the public interest that the town of Stafford, Connecticut, make application to the state for $400,000 in order to undertake a small cities community development program and to execute an assistance agreement Therefore, should one be offered. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Selectmen of the Town of Stafford, Connecticut, number one, that it is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites for state assistance imposed by Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, and number two, that the filing of an application by the Town of Stafford in an amount not to exceed $400,000 is hereby approved, and that the First Selectman, Mary Mita, is hereby authorized and directed to file such application with the Commissioner of the Department of Housing, to provide such additional information, to execute such other documents as may be required by the Commissioner, to execute an assistance agreement with the state of Connecticut for state financial assistance if such an agreement is offered, to execute any amendments, rescissions, and revisions thereto, and to act as the authorized representative of the Town of Stafford. Whew. Do we have to approve that, or we good?
Yes, you do.
I make a motion that we approve that.
Well, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I'm tired now. All right, have you had a chance to look at the minutes, Tom?
Pete, you good? You're all done, right?
Yes.
Minutes, yes, I did.
All right.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
No discussion? We're good.
No.
All righty. Public comment. Oh, thought you put your hand up. No. Yes, of course.
My name is David Walsh, 21 Grant Avenue, Stafford. I've noticed the messages that you have very well put online about working together and bipartisan solutions to the town's problem. I buy into that 100%. I've tried every way I can. I made a speech last week at the Board of Finance meeting. We had a really good discussion, maybe one of the best we've ever had.
Good.
But I would like to point out one thing. A bipartisan approach like this has to be based, I think, on three things. First of all, it has to be based on some kind of compromise. And secondly, it has to be based on an assurance that both sides are working for the good of the town. And I think lastly, it has to be based on some conception of decency and what's the right thing to do in a given situation. As a member of the Board of Finance, I'm very worried about next Wednesday night when we have to face the people of this town and tell them that we have a $1.2 million deficit. We have a possible huge looming problem with one of the major systems in the town. And the state funding for what we think we're gonna receive for the rest of the year is uncertain. Now, we've had 5 new business managers at the school 5 years in a row. You're new as First Selectman. There's very little continuity, and I can say, and I blame myself also, there's very little understanding of the total development of the town debt, the various problems we're facing. So what I'm asking, begging, is, in my mind, there's only one person who's capable of getting us through this fiscal year. And that was the person who was experienced in this and had worked with us all for the last 4 or 5 years. I never saw anybody who knew more than she did. I never saw anybody who worked harder than she did. And as far as I was concerned, she was completely nonpartisan. She just gave us the facts. When we go in there Wednesday night, we're gonna have to answer some tough questions from citizens. And if we don't have somebody there like that, who can make those kinds of, comments and answer legitimate questions people are gonna have, then I don't see how we can claim to be working in the interest of the people of the town. So what I'm begging you is to consider, at least for this fiscal year, keeping continuity with the person who held that office, even if they have to work other than, directly in the town hall, and help us get through this time, because I don't know anybody who knows anything about, knows the long-term trends. When will the bonds expire? When will they be paid off? What are the new ones that are coming in and so forth? It's tremendously important when you're running that kind of a deficit. So I would just say, we're all working together. We're gonna be there Wednesday night. Everybody in town will show up, hopefully. And, we'll have to be able to answer the questions. But we need, in this area right now, at least for this fiscal year, more than we've ever needed it before, we need continuity. And we need answers. Okay, that's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Alrighty, that's public comment. We have an appointment. Well, we have more than one appointment. Tony, you want to read that?
Sure. Hyde Park Commission, William Braun, Cheryl Wilson Maynard, Christopher Paradiso. 4-year terms to expire 3/23/2022. Zoning Board of Appeals, Dennis Cabo, to fill the unexpired term of Thomas Carter, term to expire 10/15/2019. I make a motion to approve the appointments.
I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
No comment? Anything? We're good to go? Alright. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I have one item I'd like to ask about. I understand that the assistant treasurer has put her notice in, and currently we don't have staff in the finance treasury
I
office.
can just tell you, I'm not discussing personnel issue with the public. I don't think that's appropriate.
Public information that she put her notice in, she's publicly hired, so it's
It's not,
public information. So in case you're unaware, the assistant treasurer has put a notice in, effective 2 weeks from now. And currently, we don't have a CFO existing, so I'm only curious.
that's not true. So
Somebody's performing those functions, is what you're saying?
we're taking care of that right now, but I'm not discussing any personnel issues here today.
When do you discuss anything regarding any of the town business, Mary? Because the public doesn't get to discuss any. I certainly am not filled in on anything that's happening in town hall.
Really?
So I'm only curious, we haven't rehired the floating position to follow some of these, to fill in some of these gaps. My understanding, we had a director of public works fill in for Beth, as your executive assistant for a day. I would imagine taxpayers don't want to spend $85,000 a year for a director of public works to answer your phone.
Mhm.
So I'm curious how we're working personnel here within town hall. So I guess that's my comment, since maybe I can't ask questions myself. That's all I have.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Did you make one?
I'm making one right now.
I'll second.
Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.